Hello everyone, guys and gals, motorcyclists far and wide. Welcome to another ShamWow Dude Noob video. I've got some bad news for you today. Your motorcycle might be outdated, and you might not have even noticed. Just like an unhealthy relationship, sometimes it's easier to stay with an older bike because the suffering is familiar and routine, instead of confronting your problems head on and jumping headfirst into the unknown in search of something better. But it is not hopeless. With the proper guidance, you too can recognize the shortcomings of your motorcycle and begin to aspire for something better. I mean, you worked hard to keep up your maintenance, you stayed loyal to your bike, but maybe it is time to kick it to the curb and get a motorcycle that will reciprocate your efforts with world-class components and tech. If you spend most of your time on just one motorcycle, you might not even realize that greener pastures do exist. You might think that, hey, my carburetor bike still runs just fine as long as it's at least 60 degrees out and I say 10 Hail Marys before pressing the ignition switch. But don't you want a bike that starts every time regardless of temperature? Don't you want a motorcycle that stops when it's supposed to and doesn't expect you to use a Herculean amount of strength to pull the clutch in? Let's take a minute and look at some of the warning signs of an outdated motorcycle. First, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell if you enjoy what we do here on the channel so you don't miss out on any of the videos. Today's video is proudly supported by our community over at edutainment.co. If you'd like to support the channel, the best way to do so is signing up for a membership. Not only will you get access to our fantastic Discord server, you'll also get automatic monthly entries to win one of our giveaway motorcycles, which could come in handy considering your bike is outdated and all. Plus, members get a 10% discount on all orders at shop.edutainment.co so you can find some parts to modernize your bike with our parts finder tool. With memberships as low as $10 a month, it practically pays for itself if you take advantage of the discount on the store. Head over to edutainment.co, see what it's all about, and get under to win some cool bikes. The first and likely most obvious warning sign of an outdated motorcycle is the use of a carburetor. If you're new to motorcycles, you've probably heard the merits of carburetors versus fuel injection hotly debated between boomers and zoomers in the comment section. Let's break it down. A carburetor mechanically injects air and fuel into an engine. Because this is all done manually, a carburetor is limited in its ability to easily change the air-to-fuel ratio, besides using the choke to restrict airflow to enrich the mixture during cold starts. More modern carbureted bikes use an enrichment knob that adds more fuel to the mixture instead of restricting air. This is all fine and dandy if you have no intentions of modifying your bike and you make sure you properly winterize it each season. Carburetors become tricky when they stop working properly. An older guy will say things like, rebuilding a carb ain't hard, you snowflake, and while they're not complicated per se, it isn't particularly easy or fun for an inexperienced mechanic to rebuild their carb. That is usually necessary to clean up from any gummed up jets or varnish from old gas. It is even more complicated if you want to tune your bike and put on a high-flow air cleaner or exhaust system. That means you'll have to remove and rejet the carb to allow the appropriate amount of fuel to flow through. And while companies like DynoJet sell jet kits that include the appropriate and correct amount of jet size for your air filter and exhaust setup, it is rarely 100% perfect and will require a lot of trial and error by removing the carb, changing the jet size, and reinstalling. This becomes a massive headache when tuning an inline-4 engine that has one carb for each cylinder. And as carburetors become less common, if you want to outsource the work, you'll have to seek out a professional performance shop to tune your bike, as no dealer will touch a carb anymore. And in that case, they'll want to put it on the dyno, and then you're looking to at least $500 on top of the cost of parts. Alternatively, there is fuel injection, one of the many gifts that have come from the digital matrix. Fuel injection uses a computer to determine the amount of fuel to inject into the engine based on readings from different sensors. This means that no matter the temperature conditions, your bike will be running an optimal air-fuel ratio. No need to choke the bike on cold starts. You don't have to call back memories of your angry dad. It also is way easier to tune a fuel-injected bike. If you have to change the exhaust or air cleaner or even just want to improve the fueling in stock form, all you have to do is plug in a tuner and load a preset map. These off-the-shelf maps usually work perfectly well for basic mods and are way easier than tinkering with jets and scrubbing float bowls for hours. Another glaringly obvious sign of an outdated motorcycle is if it uses drum brakes. Drum brakes used to be common on both bikes and cars, but as motorcycles became more powerful, they needed more effective braking and drum brakes began getting phased out. But surprisingly, a concerning amount of motorcycles on the road are still equipped with them in the rear. A brake drum is housed within the wheel hub, and hydraulic fluid pushes the brake shoes outward, creating friction within the drum and slowing the wheel down. In short, this is a far less effective way to slow down a moving vehicle. Disc brakes works by using the hydraulic fluid to compress pads within the caliper that grab onto brake rotors connected to the wheel. This is advantageous for countless reasons. Brake rotors are not limited in size like a brake drum is, so they can be larger with larger calipers and pads to increase contact points to more effectively slow the wheel down. It is often easier for heat to dissipate from brake discs as they're outside the wheel and often slotted to increase airflow. Disc brakes are far more effective than drum brakes and they're easier to maintain too. You might be thinking, well, 75% of braking comes from the front brake anyway, so why do I care if I have a drum in the rear? Ride a bike with a disc in the rear and you'll understand why. Also, if your bike has a drum brake in the back, the front brake is probably pretty crappy too. A good braking system will not only stop you more efficiently, but also have a progressive feel in the lever, allowing you more control over your motorcycle. Older bikes typically have a very on-off brake feel, which can lead to locking up more easily if you have less dynamic control. Also, if your bike doesn't have ABS, it might be outdated too. I prefer switchable ABS so you can still have a little bit of fun before the computer intervenes. If you're used to older bikes, you might be wondering why all the new motorcycles have their dang forks installed upside down. Well, this wasn't an engineering mistake. Upside down forks perform better than your standard right side up forks. For the noobs, upside down means that the larger fork tube lives at the top connected to the triple tree, while the narrow fork tubes are at the bottom connected to the axle. This is contrary to traditional right side up forks that have the thin fork tubes at the top and the larger fork tubes at the bottom. Like many motorcycling innovations, the upside-down fork is a consequence of improvements made to production-class motorcycle racing. An upside-down fork is stiffer, with the larger fork tube up top to handle much of the stress of high-speed turning and braking. There's also less unsprung weight because the springs are in the larger tubes at the top as opposed to the traditional forks, which makes the bike quicker to react and improves rider feel. All this contributes to a motorcycle that handles much better for spirited street riding or aggressive off-road riding. Your bike might also be a little outdated if it lacks adjustable suspension. Not every modern bike has fully adjustable suspension, like small beginner or intermediate level bikes, but most higher-end motorcycles will feature some degree of adjustability in their suspension. Older bikes will have preload adjustable rear suspension, and the front suspension is just that. It's suspension. Dialed-in suspension settings will make the bike feel optimal for rider-specific weight and riding style. A stiffer suspension will be ideal if you mostly ride on the track or super buttery highways. But if you're regularly commuting on your bumpy favorite streets, suspension that is hard as a rock is not going to do your coccyx any favors. Of course, suspension is far more complex than hard versus soft, so let's break down the different degrees of adjustability you can have in your suspension. Preload shortens or extends the spring to determine where the bike sits in the range of travel in the suspension. That's why setting preload sag is so important. Adjusting the preload can prevent you from bottoming out your suspension or alleviate front-end dive with heavy braking. Compression damping affects how quickly the suspension compresses when riding over uneven surfaces. Increasing compression damping will stiffen the suspension, and lower compression will soften it. Rebound damping affects how quickly the suspension extends back into place after it's been compressed. Each one of these settings can dramatically affect the way it feels to ride your motorcycle, so having the ability to control all these settings can make a night and day difference if you know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, just hit up your local track day and your suspension guru and get your stuff sorted. You may need a new spring in the rear if you're a taller, bigger, heavier rider or a very lightweight rider. Another way you can tell that your motorcycle is outdated is the lack of rider aids. Hey, maybe your bike is just so slow it doesn't need any rider aids. That's cool. But as motorcycles become even more powerful, rider aids have been implemented to keep them safe. Some people prefer an ungoverned analog sport bike where they're completely in control of the brake and throttle feel. Kind of like my Turbo Busa. Makes a ton of power, doesn't have anything to save you. But they're also probably good riders. But for the average street squid that spent all of his lawn mowing money on a leader bike, a couple of rider aids could probably prevent Timmy from landing in an early grave. Many new bikes come with ABS, which prevents the wheels from locking up under heavy braking. That's really useful for preventing the front from locking up, causing a crash, or the rear locking up, which dramatically increases your stopping distance. It's one of those features that many riders are indifferent to until they need it. There's also traction control, which restricts the throttle under heavy acceleration and prevents the wheels from breaking loose and losing traction. And similarly, wheelie control helps keep the front wheel down under hard acceleration so you don't power wheelie backwards. Super advanced bikes use a 6-axis IMU that measures the speed and lean angle and direction of the bike to make real-time adjustments to these safety systems. That way the bike knows whether it's leaning on its side, going straight, or coasting 12 o'clock and makes those adjustments accordingly. Most of the bikes that come with these rider aids give you control over the intensity of the intervention or allow you to switch them completely off. Again, it's one of those things that might not sound imperative until it ends up saving your life or you're baking on track. If you ride an older bike or have hopped on a friend's, you'll probably realize how unpleasant the clutch feel is. Older bikes require a little more pressure to disengage the clutch as they often have an awkward friction zone. Modern bikes have slipper assist clutches that offer a few benefits. The assist portion of the slip assist clutch refers to an easier clutch pull. These clutches move along a wedge as they're engaged and disengaged, which reduces the necessary force and allows for the use of lighter clutch springs, which are in turn easier to compress. The slipper part of the clutch refers to how much torque is transferred back from the rear wheel to the engine during deceleration. If there's too much reverse force applied, like in the event of an abrupt downshift, the clutch will slip to prevent the rear wheel from locking up. Overall, it smooths out deceleration and engine braking and is a great thing to use if you're a track rider. You can just bang down gears and not really worry about it. The last telltale sign of an outdated motorcycle is the dash. When you're looking down, do you see a monochromatic digital alarm clock or an iPad mini? I mean, not every bike needs a 7-inch TFT display, but it's kind of nice, isn't it? An interactive TFT dash usually goes hand in hand with customizable rider aids and tech features. High-end motorcycles even have electronic suspension adjustments that you can access via the TFT display. Bikes like our Street Fighter V4S, that you can win by going over at yamanoob.co, was once considered to be a luxury, is now pretty standard. Every car comes with a frickin' 15-inch infotainment system now. Why shouldn't your motorcycle have a little bit of tech on it too? I can't imagine it is prohibitively expensive to implement on motorcycles anymore, but I will say a big sweeping analog tachometer is still my most satisfying readout on a motorcycle. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Please subscribe if you like what you saw, and I'll see you on the next one. Fact: ketchup has been measured leaving the bottle at 25 miles per hour. Woo! Goodbye. Well, look at you. You've made it to the end of another Yami Noob video. You should consider yourself pretty lucky because I have curated this one right over here for you to continue watching. It's probably just as good as the one you just saw. Unless you hated the one you just saw. I don't know, maybe leave me a comment down below about how much you hated it as well too. Or just keep watching this one. Make sure you keep watching Yami Noob. Don't forget to keep watching Yami Noob. That's the most important thing. Keep watching Yami Noob.